Hello, welcome to the Sports Philanthropy Podcast. I am your host, Roy Kessel, and today we are very excited to have with us special guests Neil Schwartz and Yussuf Khan. Neil is with SBRNet. Yussuf is the CEO and founder of First and Penn, and we're going to hear about the amazing work that they're doing together to create the Get in the Game conference. So, gentlemen, welcome to the show.
Roy, thank you very much for having us.
Yes, thank you. Glad to be here.
Well, we're excited to learn more about each of your backgrounds and then dive into the conference. So, Neil, let's start with you. And I want to take you back to, when you were a young boy and how you developed your passion for sports.
That's always an interesting question, Roy. I've been a sports fan for a number of years, and I've played a number of sports growing up. I'm a baby boomer, but let's leave it at that for now. And growing up, I used to, I'd come home and I lived right across the street from a really big playground, and me and all my neighbors, we would all go over there. And in the spring, it was, baseball. In the fall, it was football, and there was always an opportunity to play sports, and sports was just a big part of my life. I was also lucky enough that, we grew up in a situation, or I grew up in a situation where our family had season tickets for the Philadelphia Eagles. And so I became very indoctrinated as an Eagles fan very early in my, my sports history. And my dad was also a big sports fan, and that really played a significant role, I think, as a role model. Sports were always a big part of my life. In fact, one funny anecdote is that, I am Jewish, and this time of the year is our high holidays. And there were a number of times where I would smuggle like a little tiny transistor radio. I would fish an earpiece up my sleeve and into my ear to listen to, the World Series, of course, the story about Sandy Koufax not pitching on Yom Kippur and all that. And I just remember my mother busting me in Temple at least 5 times for listening to World Series games back when they played them in the afternoon, way back when. So, I've been a sports guy for quite some time, Roy, and I consider myself super lucky that I've been able to make sports my career. I talk to students every day, and the one thing I say is that, look, this enthusiasm, this energy, it's not fake. It's who I am. And why? 3 words: sports are fun. And if you can't have fun talking about and being in the sports business, find something else to do.
Yeah, that passion is amazing. And back in those days, Neil, for our younger listeners, most of the games were not on television, and so you had to listen on the radio. I remember doing exactly that in high school classes, and having my classmates try and get the teacher to catch me listening to Brewers games as I was growing up. But that passion and energy, right, is one of the reasons that sports has such immense power for good and for change. And so, Yussuf, I want to turn it over to you and have you share how you developed that passion for sports.
Sure. So I first got into basketball and baseball, and because my mother wouldn't let me play football. She felt I was too skinny to play. So I begged and I begged. It took me like 3 years to finally get her to let me play. And once I found football, that was it for me. I fell in love with it. I'm actually born and raised in New York City and became a Steelers fan. My father always told me this story because he was a Dallas Cowboys fan. And when the Steelers beat them the first time in the Super Bowl, he said everything for me was black and yellow, the colors, everything. I don't remember it, but that's what he told me. So I fell in love with the Steelers in the mid-'70s, been a Steeler fan my whole life, got into football, and then I found track as well. I love track and field, so competed in high school and college in both football and track, and then played in a league for football for 20 years after college. So I've always been a great sports fan. One thing I learned when I first got into the industry, that there is a very big difference between being a sports fan and being a business person in sports. So it's something I tell all my students, that when they come into my sports management classes, we are no longer fans, right? We are business people. because if I'm a Steelers fan and get a job with the Ravens, I can't sabotage my job, right? So I have to learn to separate the two. But sports has been a part of my DNA. I love it as an athlete, as a competitor, and also as an industry veteran. I love seeing how the industry is changing and doing some great things in it too with Neil and many other people that I've worked with.
Well, it's interesting is if you talk about being a Steelers fan. I grew up in Wisconsin in the early 70s when the Packers weren't good, and all my friends were picking another team, either the Vikings or the Cowboys, coincidentally, and I never understood how you could pick another NFC team, much less a division rival at that point. So I had loved Franco at Penn State, when I was 7 years old. And so when he got drafted by the Steelers, I had good timing to jump on that bandwagon before the Immaculate Reception. And his poster is still in my childhood bedroom at my parents' house, and had the good fortune to meet Franco a few years ago at the Hall of Fame before he passed away. And that was a special opportunity. That was such an incredible team, right? You don't see that anymore with the age of free agency and everything else that goes on. So clearly, listening to both of you, we know enormous passion for the game of sports. So Yussuf, I'm going to take this back to you. Your company is First and Penn, and talk a little bit about what they do.
Sure. So I've been in the business about 25 years now, and the last company I ran was focused on sports and culture. And it's one thing that we've realized is that many times voices are overlooked by some of the bigger mainstream sports properties. So I wanted to create First and Penn to give a voice to voices that are many times overlooked and not heard. So we work with voices of color in sports to tell stories in sports that maybe others don't look into or have overlooked. So that's what we do from an editorial basis. And we have our same focus, whether it's editorial, whether it's interviews, events, etc. We really want to become a destination where people can hear from different voices, from different storylines and perspectives in sports.
That's fantastic, because that's very well aligned with our philosophy, right? The good stories don't get told often enough. Somebody sends out a silly tweet, and that's going to be the fodder on the talking head shows for a whole week. But somebody does amazing work in the community, and they may get a couple-minute feature that runs one time, and people don't see it. So giving a permanent home to those stories is really important. Neil, take us through your career. You've been involved in lots of things and evolved into SBRNet now. So take us through a little bit of that.
Yeah, for like the last 25 years, I've been involved in the data information research side of the sports business. When I got out of school, one of my first jobs, I worked as director of marketing for Comcast, the big cable company. They have since grown into a juggernaut. Unfortunately, I didn't stay there that whole time. But, while I was there, I started working with data, and I started to realize the power that data and information could have in terms of helping you make decisions, marketing decisions, overcome strategic challenges, all of those things. So coincidentally enough, I developed this amazing passion for using data. In fact, my daughter likes to call me the oldest living data nerd. I was doing data before data was cool. Let's just put it that way. And 5 years ago, I had an opportunity to buy SBRNet, stands for Sports Business Research Network. We currently sell data to around 260 colleges and universities focused on sports fandom, sports participation, as well as the sale and revenue of equipment, footwear, and apparel, all for the sports business. But one of the things that we also do, and one of the things that really is changing in our industry, is that you just can't be a provider of data or a provider of information. You really also need to be a provider of content. And that's actually how I met Yussuf. We decided that we wanted to have content on the site that we could use to support the data that we were providing. And Yussuf and my former partner, Mark Sullivan, we sat down. I learned a lot about what Yussuf does. I was very impressed. I have to admit, I'm an old dog, but I can still be taught a few new tricks. I learned a lot of things when I started reading, Yussuf's First and Penn site. I mean, one of the big things I learned about was about Juneteenth. I had no idea what it was, to be honest. And when I read it, I was like, wow, this is a story that needed to get told. And I was really proud to say that I knew Yussuf, and now, of course, I'm partners with Yussuf, that he was out there telling these stories of, in many cases, as he said, groups that have been highly marginalized over the years. And that, to me, has always been, again, part of a calling or part of something that I've done. But, again, I've been on the data side of the sports business. Prior to SBRNet, I worked for a company called SportsScan that collected weekly point of sales data. I worked for the Sports and Fitness Industry Association for 3 years, doing their annual participation research. So I am pretty steeped in the research side of the business. And I'd like to believe that I've been lucky enough to cover, almost have what I would like to call a 360-degree view of the sports business through data. And, data is my thing. I cannot tell a lie.
Well, we've seen the rise of data, right? Very, very prominently. You've seen the evolution of events like the Sloan Sports Analytics Conference and other things of that nature. There's some amazing organizations that have come up, right, that feature that data, both from a sponsorship perspective, from an impact perspective. So, Neil, take us through the concept of the Get in the Game conference.
So when we first sat down and talked about Get in the Game, the germ, or let's say the first step, really started with the podcast that we do at SBRNet called My First Job in Sports. My First Job in Sports was originally created to help students understand what it takes to get that all-important first job in the business of sports. And how best to learn how to do that? Well, we interview people who are recent to the sports industry, recently graduated school, various degrees. We would talk to them, understand what it took for them to get a job. But then, as we were talking to Yussuf, and as I became more friendly with Yussuf, Yussuf, came to us and talked about, that particular, area is really missing, when it comes to, in a lot of ways, DEI and other, by the way, marginalized groups that, they just didn't have that level of education. They didn't have that level of sophistication. They didn't have the level of understanding. And as Yussuf always says, just because you're a fan of the New York Mets doesn't mean you're going to go to work for the New York Mets. There are just so many jobs, brands, retail, associations, organizations like yourself, not-for-profits, Roy, and just so many NGBs, national governing bodies. There are so many places, the sports tourism industry. There are so many places where students can now go in order to get their sports career started. And that's what we want to do. We want to open up the opportunities and then help students with the skills, the motivation, the tools that they need in order to help them go get internships and jobs within the business of sports.
Yeah, and I think you touched on so many important points there. Yussuf mentioned about being a fan, right? When I was teaching at Northwestern, one of the messages we had to drill into the students is being a fan is not a qualification for getting a job in sports. That's kind of a given, because there's easier places to get a job that, in many respects, at the entry level, pay more, right, than the sports world will. And so, today the business of sports has evolved enormously from, the time when, Neil, when you were young and growing up, right? The merchandising, the technology, the broadcasting elements are dramatically different. I remember speaking at Michael Finley's basketball camp and talking to the kids about careers in sports, and the message is just what you're doing, right? Anybody can work in sports. You can pick any profession you want, and there's an application to that in sports. So, Yussuf, building on what Neil talked about, share a bit more of your vision for working together on the conference.
Sure. So, my vision of the conference actually started when I was at ESPN. I got there in '99. That was my first job in sports. Actually, I was in banking for a couple of years, and then I moved to ESPN. And I remember I was sitting in an interview with my manager and a student who was graduating. And she asked him, what do you want to do in sports? And he said, I don't know. I just want to work in sports. I really am a fan. I want to work in sports. She's like, yes, but what do you want to do? And he said, I don't know. I don't care. I just want to be in sports. And she said, well, thank you for coming. Yussuf, can you take him to the elevator? And it really threw me off. And I walked him to the elevator and I said, good luck. And, I'm sorry it ended that way. So I went back to her office and I said, why'd you end the interview like that? And she said, because he didn't take the time to research all the different fields that are in sports and at ESPN. I mean, we had programming, sales, ad planning, outdoor.com, et cetera. And he didn't know. And that always struck me. And so when I first met Mark and Neil and we were talking about it, I was also teaching sports management. I realized that so many students, they have no clue what they want to do. They have no clue how to get in. They don't understand how to navigate. They don't know how to, build their career as well. So, that's when we started talking, myself, Neil, and Mark, and then this year, myself and Neil, about how are we educating students about the skill sets that are needed for the different career paths. Because again, like Neil said, just because you're a basketball fan does not mean you work for the NBA. It's really your skill sets that will dictate your path. So I happen to be a background of sales and marketing, so there's certain skills that go into that a lot of students don't have, that maybe they are better off going into finance or events planning or data or things like that. But if they don't know what the skills are, then they're at a disadvantage. So that's how we wanted to sort of open up the event, is to have it be an educational opportunity for students and then help us build this pipeline of qualified candidates of color for the industry. Because one thing we realize is that diversity is lacking. So I'll give you my personal experience at ESPN in sales planning department. I was there 5 years and I was the only man of color who was there for 4.5 of those 5 years. And other people were in production and broadcasting and things, but my department, which teaches you about the business of sports and how television works and ratings and pricing and planning, I was the only one. So I felt that, there's a need to create this pipeline of qualified candidates of color. And I was excited to work with Neil, formerly with Mark as well, to help develop it through Get in the Game.
And I think that's terrific. Yussuf, you talk about developing that pipeline. We've been fortunate enough to participate the last few years in the Black Sports Business Symposium that's been hosted in Atlanta. Large event right there in Mercedes-Benz Stadium. Amazing event, amazing caliber of speakers, right? And you can see the difference when you give people an opportunity. And we try and do that through our internships as well, because I know until you start working, right, you can't really tell or know if that job track is what you want. When I went to law school, I focused on litigation. Looking back on it, that probably was not the best decision in terms of other opportunities and things, right? You spend a lot of time dealing with paperwork and research and everything else, and you're not really creating value. As I say, you're destroying value and expecting your clients to be happy just because you destroyed a little less of their value than the value on the other side. But one of the things that's interesting to me, and I'm interested in both of your perspectives, is are we expecting students to know too early in their career? I look back at myself, right? And coming through college, even through law school, I didn't really know exactly what I wanted to do. But we see a lot of that response that you described with cutting off that interview because somebody doesn't know. And again, I think we can coach the students to be more professional in that access point and talk about what strengths they add. One of the things that we get frequently is resumes from people or emails from people that they would like to come and work at Sports Philanthropy Network and work with Kayla and I because they know they could learn a lot from us, right? And that's not really the standard. The standard is, what can you do that's going to help us in our tasks, in our business, in our growth? And that's, I think, what you were describing.
Yeah, and to continue on that thought, we have a responsibility as people who've been in the industry to now let students know this is what we expect, this is what to look for, this is how to prepare yourself. And when we were creating the agenda for Get in the Game, one of the areas that we focused on was on workshops to prepare students. And so whether it's building your resume, whether it's researching different departments or looking at who's involved in what job, those are all things we wanted to educate them about. This year, when Neil and I got together, we said that it's, again, education is the focus, but what can we do to better prepare them for the event? Because last year we realized some students were better prepared than others. So we actually created this idea of having these pre-event prep sessions where we spend 30 minutes with a school and the professors and their students and tell them, this is what we expect, this is what you're going to encounter, this is how to dress, this is, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Because this way, all students are prepared. They're on a better playing field, on a more level playing field. And now it's not up for them to guess, like, should I wear a tie? We'll tell you what to wear. Your job is to come in and be prepared now based on what we've told you. And if you don't, then that's on you. But if you weren't prepared because we didn't tell you, that's on us. So we have a responsibility that I think we're really taking seriously this year, which I'm very excited about. And myself and Neil are really making sure we're working with partners who understand that. And I think we've been very fortunate that they are all aligned with the mission.
Roy, you mentioned something that was kind of interesting early on. Is that, how do students know what they want to do? And you're right. That is something that, Yussuf and I also want to address. But, I think that there are just so many, and I don't want to use the word nuances, but there are just so many areas. And, and I can use the example. We have a number of brands there. We have we have 2 footwear brands, right, this year, Yussuf?
Yep.
And so these 2 footwear brands, I mean, when you think about a pair of sneakers, all you think about is the pair of sneakers on your feet, but you don't think about the materials that have gone into it, the design that went into it, the pipeline that's been used for a supply chain to make sure the materials are all arriving at the factory at the right time, that the materials are being chosen. Then the sales aspect, the marketing aspect, the warehousing, the merchandising. There's just so many areas that, especially students, they just don't understand that it takes to get those sneakers from, raw materials all the way to your feet. And the same goes true with sports tourism, events, really anything. I mean, when you find out what goes on behind the scenes during, a professional sports event, NFL game, NBA game, NHL game, you would be amazed at the number of people, the number of tasks, and the number of different areas that are all a part of that event that you see going on in front of you, whether it's on TV, whether it's in person, whether it's via streaming. It's amazing how much it really takes to, bring these events, put sneakers on your feet, serve the public, from a retail perspective. There's just so much that students don't know. And Yussuf and I have taken it upon ourselves that we want to educate and then help them implement and navigate and motivate. A lot of eights there. In order to be able to, get into this industry that both Yussuf and I, and you too, Roy, have loved so long for so much.
Yeah, Neil, you raised an interesting point, because one of the things we were teaching at Northwestern was about talking about a sporting event, right? And people often forget that it's an event. They focus on the competition, on the game, and there's 1,000 moving pieces that go into getting an NFL or college or high school football team on the field, right? Everything that it takes to get the competition going. But then when you look at all of the other career tracks that exist in the venue, right, from an event production side of things at a stadium, between security and food and beverage and all of the hospitality elements and signage. I mean, there's a million parts that go into it. And I think that very frequently students get highly focused on sort of the sports activity, right? When most of the careers are in areas that may not be, quote unquote, under the lights and glamorous, right? You're not going to be the player. You're probably not going to be the coach. You're probably not going to be the main broadcast media or sideline reporter. I mean, somebody will get there, right? But there's a lot of jobs, as Yussuf said, in producing things for ESPN. How many people are working in there behind the scenes for that one broadcast. And I think that getting students to understand that, I know at your conference you're going to visit Under Armour, and we just recently had Joe Foster, the founder of Reebok, on this podcast, and it's amazing to see all the elements that go into every single piece of the puzzle, right? The shoes, the apparel, the signage, everything that you're talking about.
It's interesting how fields have evolved and how new businesses, as Neil alluded to, have evolved out of this. So when I started ESPN, a lot of people don't know what it takes to get a commercial on air, right? And they think it's pretty easy, but there's so many moving parts to it. And then once they started inserting, video graphics into it, I was there for the original 1st and 10 line, that was a big deal. And now these are things which are just done with technology like this, so now there's so many more fields you can open up. Now you can even watch a game on social media. Before you couldn't do that. Now there's cord cutting. So now you got to watch it on streaming platforms. So the industry has changed over the last 25 years and it's continuing to evolve. But I think the basic principles are still the same. You have to understand how the industry works, what are the skills required, and then figure out if those are the right path for you. So while the jobs may have changed, basic principles and skill sets have not. And so we take it upon ourselves to educate them. If you want this is what you need. If you want this is what you need.
Yeah, and I think you touch on it. The evolution is enormous, right? If you go back and watch TV clips of baseball playoff games in the 70s, right? You don't have the score in the upper corner. You don't have the little base diagrams. You're watching, and you're just, if you walked away or you tuned in late, you're trying to figure out where are we at in this game? What inning is it in? What is the score? What's been going on. You don't have all of that information. So, you've put together this conference, and I know this is your second year. Talk a little bit about some of the success and the partnerships you created in the first year.
Well, I think number one is that, Yussuf and I, what we're most proud of is the fact that we've been able to, from last year's event, approximately 21 of the attendees got scholarships, got internships from our sponsors. I mean, Roy, that really is where the rubber meets the road. And that's what Yussuf and I, we talk about this all the time. So I know, Yussuf and I we share the same level of excitement and enthusiasm, and we're proud of what we've done. And this year, we're expecting between 175 and 200 students. Yussuf is preparing the students, and he has taken it upon himself to create these pre-event prep sessions, because what did we heard from our sponsors that, hey, some of the students weren't really well prepared, and it would be great if you could get them better prepared, get their resumes polished up, get them, teach them how to do their elevator pitch, a 3 to 5 minute pitch about themselves. And Yussuf has done an amazing job working with many of our partner schools who are sending 10, 15, 20 students to this event. And let me tell you, schools would not be willing to make this investment. They would not be willing to send 10, 20 students if they did not feel there was a significant benefit for those students. And the same can be said for I think we're up to about 23 sponsors now, Yussuf? Yep. The 23 sponsors, they would not, and we've gotten, I'd say about 80% of our sponsors are repeats from last year, which is, again, something we're proud of, because that sends the right message that we're on to the right thing. We're doing the right thing. Look, could we do things better? Of course. And are we going to do things better? We hope so. But we really think that we are on to something. Just to let you know, when we did our post-event survey, people love the intimate nature of the event. Well, we're going to keep it that way, because that's what makes us unique. That's our unique selling proposition. So we're excited about it.
Yeah, and if I can add on that, Roy, I think that, again, if we make this about the students and the brands in the sense of who are they trying to recruit through these, our event, for example, then we're on the right track, and we're helping both parties meet at a place where they need to and have the right environment to to discuss the opportunity, discuss who they each are. And I think so far we've had, some really, really great feedback that allowed us to grow the event from year 1 to year 2. And we've actually incorporated some new panel sessions because of it. Some students were like, hey, we want to learn about this. We want to learn about that. So we are listening to what they're saying, both from a brand and a student perspective, and we will continue to build it. But to Neil's point, the intimacy and the engagement that we created by doing an event that has fewer than 200 students, I think that's the most important thing. So if we cap it at that amount, we maintain the intimacy that we've created, and we keep both parties happy and make it a successful relationship.
Well, congratulations on a great vision. We support that. I think it's very important to give those opportunities to young students to be able to participate and learn from individuals that have been in this space for a long time. So Neil, Yussuf, thank you for joining us today, and for all of our viewers and listeners. We appreciate you taking time to join us on the Sports Philanthropy Podcast. This is your host, Roy Kessel, signing off. Please remember to live generously. Thank you.
Thank you, Roy.
Thanks, Roy.